And welcome to a brand new podcast series at Suncoast Audio. This is In Stereo with Mike and Rick. I'm Mike Bovaird.
And I'm Rick Miller.
And we want to welcome everybody to the brand new podcast series. We're going to be interviewing some interesting guests and characters of the high-end audio industry and bringing you some very good topics for discussion. First off, wanted to thank the entire Suncoast Audio team, especially Mike Malley, for putting together this new studio. We're actually about a mile away from Suncoast Audio's retail store, and we've built
a top secret location.
In a top secret location, we've built out this new studio, and it's something that we had been talking about doing for many, many months. And I told the team we're not going to spare any expense, and we're going to build a proper world-class podcast studio. Now, the goal is not to become YouTubers or podcasters or anything like that. My goal is to provide additional content to Suncoast Audio prospects and customers. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about the studio that you put together?
Sure. So I have some notes on my phone here. And the way that I have it laid out is basically source. So it's the opposite of when you're setting up a stereo system. It's the source to your ears as the listener or watcher. So we will start with the Shure SM7B microphones. They're broadcast microphones. They're very good at rejecting any outside sounds. They're outstanding.
So not good for karaoke. Like if Rick and I wanted to break into Cracklin' Rose, these aren't going to be good microphones for that.
They'd actually be perfect for that because they're good at rejection. So if you guys want to do karaoke, we can do that.
No, I don't think. No, that wouldn't be
something.
You're sure?
That'd be something to consider.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, those are the microphones.
Okay.
We're using the Gator Frameworks mic boom arms, which they're known to be kind of the best in the industry.
Okay.
We're using Gotham XLR mic cables with heavy shielding because we had a noise issue initially in the studio. So those are going directly to cloud lifters, which essentially just adds more gain to these microphones because these are very gain hungry microphones. And then we have short Gotham XLR cables connecting that to our rack-mounted interface, which is the Universal Audio Apollo X8P interface. I'll go into some of the reasons why I went with that interface and why we went with a Mac system over a Windows system. So with USB-C, essentially, basic USB-C, is it's good for charging your phone. It's good for file transfers as well. The fastest USB-C can go is 10 gigabits per second. Thunderbolt 3 and Thunderbolt 4, on the other hand, can go up to 40 gigabytes per second. That's very, very fast. That means no latency. No latency or very low latency, imperceptible latency for the guests and the hosts on both sides. So that's just kind of the basic reason why we decided to go with Mac. You can do Thunderbolt on a PC, but it's extremely expensive. And then for the mic preamplifiers, we're obviously going into the Apollo, and we're using the emulated Manley Voxbox, world famous Voxbox mic preamplifiers. Tons of features. It has a compressor built in, de-esser built in, all sorts of EQing and stuff like that, all in one box. Manley makes a great product. They worked with Universal Audio to develop this, and I think they did a hell of a job. I'm a huge fan. I have a background in audio, and I love it. Pro audio and hi-fi.
And home audio, yeah.
And then we are using the Mackie HM400 headphone amplifier. It has 12 outputs. It's a 4-channel, so we can provide many, many people with headphones. So that's basically the full audio loadout for the studio. It doesn't sound like much, but that's everything you need to get a podcast studio going. And then for cameras and lighting, the entire studio is set up with GVM lighting. It's based on my research. For the money, it's as good as it gets. It's great, as you can see. The lighting's great in this room. For cameras, we have Sony A7 III bodies with constant power adapters to avoid any overheating or any issues at all. That we don't have to worry about batteries at all. And then for lenses, we're using, for the close shots, so the one of me that you're seeing right now, this one of Mike here, and this one of Rick, those are all 35mm Sony G Master Prime lenses, which means they do not zoom. For this shot, the wide shot of Mike and Rick there, that is a 14mm G Master Prime for the wide angle to be able to get the entire desk in the shot. All cameras are going via HDMI into the Blackmagic ATEM Mini Pro, which has 4 inputs that allows me to switch between the cameras like you just saw. Cameras and audio are being routed into OBS, which is Open Broadcaster Software. It's an open source piece of software. It is the best in the industry, although we did have a little hiccup earlier that I think we got sorted out now.
Good.
And then, yeah, that's about it. We are recording audio only simultaneously at a higher resolution for the audio only version of this podcast. More info on that to come. The heart of the entire operation is a Mac Studio, and it is the Mac Daddy of Mac Studios. It's got 128 gigabytes of RAM, the M1 Max ARM chip, with a 20-core CPU and a 48-core GPU. It's maxed out. It's as good as it gets. It's as good as it can be. And then I have 2 monitors beside me. I'm monitoring the cameras and basically producing in real time. So that's the setup. I'll do a separate video for everybody so they can actually see the studio. But that's...
Cool. Thank you, Mike. Mike has actually been working very hard for several months. When I came up with the idea and I said, listen, I'm not looking to become a YouTuber. I simply want to create content and bring to life some of the characters that we deal with on a regular basis in high-end audio. You're going to be hearing from people people you've seen in the industry, a lot of people you haven't seen in the industry. You'll be hearing from fellow audiophiles, some DIYers. There's a lot of people that we have lined up. So we're planning on doing a show every 2 weeks and having a guest in the studio or on Zoom every couple of weeks. And we have enough lined up, I think, for almost a year right now. I want to talk a little bit about my partner Rick. Rick Miller's been involved with Suncoast Audio since day one. He's been a big help for me. He's kind of been more of a behind the scenes. So if you guys have been watching our channel for a while, you probably haven't seen much of Rick. Maybe on the one with Kale and Gabriel from Shinyata, you might have been on a video we did there. I don't recall. But Rick has been instrumental in helping in so many ways, not only in setup or dialing systems in for the customer, but it's very important when we have to upgrade a component or do a repair. We take, one of our other companies is Play It Again Audio, and we take a lot of used equipment. One time we took an audio research piece in, and they didn't even solder the caps in. And
oh man, the videos of that.
The video of that is hilarious. I mean, we couldn't understand why the caps kept falling out. So, and Rick's feeling around, there's no solder here. So we did a little bit of a repair job on that one and got the soldering done on those caps, and it worked perfectly. Rick, he's going to talk a little bit about his background, but he's been involved in, the engineering, the high-end audio side for over 40 years. And Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I got interested in audio back in the late 60s, early 70s, and bought a Sherwood receiver back then and a little set of speakers and really liked it. And then about that time, shortly after I got out of high school, I started working in the cable TV industry, for a large multi-system operator, and I was working on the bench all day repairing cable TV amplifiers and cable TV equipment. So I was doing that during the day, and then at night I'd work on projects, electronic projects at home. And I was able to save up enough money to buy a pair of JBL L100 speakers that I really liked, and then got a Marantz receiver, and then stayed with that for a while. And now I have a Linn turntable that I got back in 1986, and that feeds a couple of different preamps that I use. One is solid state, one is tube.
You built these preamps?
Yes, yeah, I built those. And then that goes into a Parasound 821 power amp, and then I do have a Luxman DX03.
No, DO3X.
DO3X.
Yeah. He's not
CD
in sales.
Player. No. Don't remember all the model numbers like you do. Mike's an encyclopedia of model numbers.
Yeah.
And got it from Suncoast Audio,
Yep.
and it's very good. So I do listen to records with my Linn and then CDs with my Luxman, but I'm not streaming right now. I'm just doing hardware, and I've got quite a collection of records and CDs. And I like CDs if I'm making changes or tweaks to the system. It's easier to jump back and forth in the same track to hear the differences with the CDs and keep the record wear down, when you're not using that just for evaluating. I have multiple subwoofers that I've got around the room in different places to try to even the bass response in the room. And I'm always like learning things, on print matter, on the internet, even looking at patents, seeing how people are doing things, going on forums, reading about what other people are doing. And I have a large technical bench in one of my spare bedrooms where I build and test things. And I'm always going to be a lifelong electronics guy and tinkering guy, even though when I worked in cable TV, I was doing other things with towers and antennas and earth station antennas and signal processing equipment, but I always liked the audio. And to me, the audio works both sides of your brain. It takes one side, the logical side, to build the system, put the system together, and then the other side is used, the emotional side, for the enjoyment of it. So I think it's a good thing for your brain, because it works both sides of your brain in there.
Very well said. I think you can see why Rick is going to be such a valuable member of the new podcast team. Coming from, when we have guests on, he's going to be coming at things from a technical standpoint. I'll be coming at them from a business standpoint. So we're going to be able to hopefully get some really good questions in for some of our guests. Rick, at home, just to wrap up, you've got an original pair of JBL L100s that
Yes.
you've modified.
Yes.
And then you have a spare set, brand new, still in the box, JBL L100s from the 70s that
Yeah.
you haven't touched yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been working a lot lately with your own system, building subwoofers of various sizes and trying to even out some room nodes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I came across this theory on the internet from a guy named Earl Geddes about multiple subwoofers, and then there was a guy named Todd Welty with Harman who also talked about multiple subwoofers. And I think it really does work, that if you have different subwoofers placed around the room in different places, you get some additions, you get some cancellations in different places, and instead of having peaks and valleys, it's just sort of smoother around the whole room. And I especially try to concentrate on the listening position. You naturally want that smoother, but you also want it that if you have guests over and people are listening a little bit away from the sweet spot, that they're going to have some good bass response too. So that's been something I've been playing around with a lot in the last year or so, is that it's pretty interesting how multiple subwoofers can really enhance your bass in your listening room.
Rick, there's a lot of audiophiles out there that believe, having a subwoofer, in your system is a sign of weakness in your main speakers, and nothing could be further from the truth. I've had this conversation with several people and told them that's just incorrect, that your speakers could go down to 20 hertz flat, but having subwoofers, scattered throughout the room, and we've talked about this, is the best way to even out any bass nodes and get, as you said, as consistently flat bass as you could.
Yeah.
So you don't get those peaks and valleys and whatnot. So I have 4 subwoofers. I think you've probably got 4 or 6 in your system. They're not doing a lot. This isn't about subwoofers to try and rattle the room, and they're doing very, very little except canceling and balancing out all of those room nodes, because the bass waves are so tricky to get right. And I think we have our mutual friend has 8 or 12 subwoofers, and his room is pretty tricky. So I'm a big believer. Now, I always say 2 or more, never 1. So if you can only afford 1 subwoofer, you're better off with none, because you will be able to isolate it, locate it, almost no matter where you put it. Even if you put it between the speakers, it's not going to sound right. So I always say 2 or more, or
yeah, you're right, Mike.
Yeah. And you found the same thing.
Yeah, because you think about it, you got 2 speakers in the front of the room and they're both moving. You put subwoofers in the front of the room, you're still moving that, creating those waves the same way, but you put them around the room and then you get different sources. And it'd be just the same thing if you had a vat of water and you started moving your hands here and then you started moving your hands here, you'd create waves that would crash into each other, and they would eventually smooth out and give you a better bass response. And as I say, this has been documented by Todd Welty and Earl Geddes, that this really does happen. They've measured it and they've seen that multiple subwoofers give you a smoother bass. And each one of the more subwoofers you add, each one has to do a little bit less work.
Right.
So, if you had one really loud and then you added 2 or 3 more, then you'd bring them all down because they're all working together to give you that bass pressure in the room. So it's easier on the subwoofers. It equalizes out the response in the room, gives you a larger sweet spot. The only downside is things we refer to as the wife acceptance factor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You might have your partner, your wife, that says, I don't like those things over there. And then you got to deal with that. So maybe some compromises have to be made. But they make some small now. Some can go underneath sofas, behind sofas. There's a variety of different solutions to that.
Yeah, in my own system, I've got 4 B&W DB1D, so they're dual 12s. And the reason I like these is that, number one, you use your iPhone to configure the subwoofer to the room and the front main speakers. So it doesn't really matter where you put the subwoofer in the room. It will DSP not only for the room, but where you put it in the room.
That's great.
And so I found them to be extremely coherent. In fact, when I first put them in, and I had taken out some Rels and some other subs I had, I honestly didn't think they were on. I kept getting up saying, well, they're not working, because I just couldn't hear, and that's the sign of great integration.
Yeah, we don't want like a home theater type effect.
No, that's different. If you want home theater, you want crashes and boom. Yeah, that's. But for 2-channel audio, you want it to blend as seamlessly as possible, not only with the front, but also into the room. For me, I have mine scattered, so my left one is maybe a foot forward of the left speaker, and then I have another one 10, 12 feet down, just in front of the listening position on the left side. Then I have another one behind me on the right, and then another one that's about halfway down the wall on the right hand side. So they're truly scattered throughout the room, and I get my room's always been very tricky, especially around 73 hertz. It's always been very tricky, and I've been able to get outstanding bass now.
That's great.
Yeah. So the big improvement. Let's see. Let's talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. So I've been involved with high-end audio since the 1970s. So when I was young, my father was very much into Macintosh and Klipschorn speakers and quadraphonic sound. So for those who don't know what quadraphonic sound is, it was essentially one instrument, per speaker kind of setup. And if you were listening to Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, it was pretty cool, especially back then. So I had exposure very, very early on to high-end audio. I remember on a Saturday morning, I would come down to the basement, and I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and my father would have all the equipment out of the rack and all the cables on the floor, and he would be sitting on the sofa, and he'd say, "Put it back together. You're going to learn. You're going to learn how to put this back together." And I learned audio through that and from him on setting up turntables and learning about, amps and preamps and speakers and transmission line speakers and a variety of different things that, I picked up on. And we'd love to spend Saturdays together and go to the hi-fi stores. And we went to the shows. There actually was shows back then, and we just some really good shows back then. We went to them, so we had a good time. And I learned a lot all through the '80s. I spent every dollar I had. I had multitude of different part-time jobs, and every dollar I had, I was buying and purchasing audio equipment. I had Carver electronics. I had B&W 801Fs. I had IMF transmission line speakers, Akai equipment, reel-to-reel, Pioneer turntable, all kinds of different things. So I was constantly, I picked up as many jobs as I could, and I was saving and scrimping and buying. And all through the 90s, same type of thing. Magnapans and Wilsons and all sorts of different equipment that I got into. How did I get to creating Suncoast Audio? Prior to Suncoast Audio starting in 2015, I was involved in IT. So I was involved in large scale SAP implementations for very large companies like Coca-Cola, Bristol Myers Squibb, AstraZeneca, Nike, Publix supermarkets here in Florida, Tropicana. I could go on and on. Over 200 implementations. And not to get too personal, but I lost, both of my parents passed away, and it was an eye-opener, and it was really a punch in the gut that told me that you don't live forever. And I wasn't enjoying the IT world. It was almost 25 years by that point in time I had been doing it. I wasn't enjoying it, so I wanted to sell the company and do something I enjoyed. So it was a pretty large company. We had a lot of offices and a lot of staff and a lot of developers. I even had an office in Noida, India, a team of developers in India, and we had offices throughout North America. And I sold the business, and took a couple of months to kind of really decide what I wanted to do next. And it hit me that I wanted to turn my passion for high-end audio into a business. I didn't envision where we are today in terms of the success of Suncoast Audio, but also the other businesses that I have. Play It Again Audio. We have a distribution company. I'm also a part owner in the Florida Audio Expo, and we will be having Bart Andier, that manages the Florida Audio Expo, on the show. He'll be one of the guests. We have about 25 guests lined up. Bart will be one of them, and he'll talk about the upcoming Florida Audio Expo, which is going to be in February again in 2023. So it's just taken off. I also own the forum Audio Shark. And Audio Shark I started years and years before even thinking about getting into high-end retail. And I really started it because I wasn't really happy with the other forums that were out there. So I created my own. And it was really for a dozen or so of my friends to come and have a place to talk about music and equipment. And now there's over 20,000 members. So if you haven't checked it out, check out and join Audio Shark. It's a good place. It's a safe environment, I can assure you. Not too many arguments get going there. So
I don't know about that.
No, it's not
I've
that
seen
bad.
some pretty good ones, man.
That's the other places. The other places are good for the arguments, not at Audio Shark. But Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So it's very similar to yours, how I got started. My dad was an audiophile when I was a kid. He was listening to the same stuff, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all that stuff. Doors. I could go on and on and on. So for me, initially, it was music. And slowly, I started to ask him about turntables and ask him about the setup and how everything worked. And that kind of got me interested. And as I got older, I initially was working in web design. And while I was doing that, I started getting I went down the rabbit hole, which we all do eventually. All of us audiophiles end up doing that at some point.
Right.
And yeah, I bought a VPI turntable. First, I bought a Thorns
Mm-hmm.
and realized it was a little too much
Okay.
to adjust the springs and everything. It's like the Lynn Sondek that Rick has.
Yeah.
Rick,
Yeah.
you have to be an engineer like Rick. You have to be geeky and like to do those things.
Tweaking all the
Yeah,
time.
he's tweaking all the time.
I mean, I enjoy it now a lot
Right.
more so. I just didn't understand it at the time. I didn't realize what I was getting into. But anyway, so I sold that and I got a Scout,
Cool.
a VPI Scout, and that was my first turntable, my first good turntable. And I just started collecting and I started reading and learning about the full analog signal chain. I got really into jazz. I got really into Blue Note. I got really into all that stuff. So, and then it started spiraling. And then I went to this, I was searching Google for a local audiophile meetup.
Yep.
And I found the Suncoast Audiophile Society.
Yeah, and up in Tampa.
Up in Tampa.
Yeah, a very big group. We have about 140 members, and that's how I met Mike. I went to a local meetup, and there was this sea of walkers and canes, and I saw this young guy, and I said, he's either the Uber Eats guy, or he's lost. But neither of those turned out to be correct. He actually was there on his own accord, which was shocking. But anyway, I got to know Mike and talk to him, and he was really into high-end audio, but more so really into analog and turntable setup and that sort of thing. So that's how I discovered Mike and how we joined Suncoast Audio. So yeah.
Yep. And my system is still in the works.
Still in the works.
Still in the works. We'll see how it goes.
Do you have a good dealer?
I got a great dealer, Suncoast Audio.
The best.
If you hang around with Rick, you're going to be buying vintage, all vintage equipment. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about, we had planned just to do an intro to talk about the show and, the format. As I mentioned, it's not to become YouTubers. It's to provide content to Suncoast Audio customers and would-be customers. But one of the things I wanted to talk about on this show, it's a pretty hot topic, is the whole, digital versus analog, debate. And it's something that was simmering in the background for several years. There'd always pop up a discussion here or there, and it would quickly be put to rest. But I think the situation with MoFi, if you haven't followed, Mobile Fidelity has stated that a lot of their records dating back to, I believe, 2008 have come from digital files. So master tape.
I didn't know it was 2008.
Yeah, I think that's what they said, from some basically dating back to 2008, maybe sooner, maybe a little later. But they were, master taped to DXD or DSD 64 in some cases, like the Carole King Tapestry One Step. So, and then pressed to vinyl after that. It doesn't bother me because I still think those particular albums, the Abraxas, the Monk, the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, I think they're the best I've ever heard.
Yeah, they sound
good. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. And I'm glad they're part of my collection. But this entire situation has brought to the forefront the whole debate again. And I've heard people say, well, if you're new to audio or you're going to get into the hobby, don't buy a turntable. You just don't need a turntable. You don't need the expense and the inconvenience in getting into it. And I would argue that couldn't be further from the truth. And
I agree.
The reason is it's not about the format so much, and we will get into that, but it's about the fact of collecting and about the love of the music. So I hear audiophiles say all the time, oh, it's not about the gear, it's about the music. Well, if that's true, you definitely want to have a turntable, and I'll tell you why. The collectors of albums and various things like that, you're going to find much more related to vinyl. So you're going to see people, vinyl collectors, have YouTube channels and Facebook groups and other things like that. And you're not going to see, as much CD collectors going online and talking about their favorite CD of a particular album.
Not
but
since
with
1992.
Right. But with vinyl, you're going to have guys who might be looking for, they love the Marvin Gaye album and they're looking for the best version of that, or Bob Seger, or it could be Eric Clapton, or it could be a jazz album of Miles Davis. You're going to find that the vinyl guys are much more into searching and finding out that great album. And I've learned so much from watching these guys and listening and reading of the vinyl collectors. I mean, there's been albums I was totally unaware of, and I'll be reading, a review on one and go and buy it. So I think the vinyl collecting is key to a new audiophile. I think it's a really good way to get into the hobby, and I think you'll find that you enjoy it more. I think that you'll find that you enjoy, going and looking and finding those gems of records. Just the other day, I think I showed you, I dropped my kids had to go to the dentist, and right next door was, or a couple doors down, was the Goodwill. And I thought, I'll just go in there and see if there's any albums. I went in there, and there was a original first pressing. I looked it up on my phone, the original first pressing of Supertramp, Breakfast in America, and the original Supertramp, Crime of the Century.
I heard
Now
it.
I pulled them out, and I looked, and they looked pretty clean. So I bought them for 99 cents, took them home, cleaned them up, and they sound absolutely fantastic. So that's something that I think that the vinyl collectors can get into. Is if you're getting into the hobby, I strongly encourage you to invest in a turntable. I'm not talking about a Crosley that you find at Walmart.
No.
I'm talking about a decent VPI or a Riga or a Clear Audio or a Project, or some other turntable. There's some really good turntables, and
it's worth the investment, like we said. It's worth the investment.
Absolutely.
And saving for.
Look at Rick. Look at Rick. He's had the same turntable since 1986.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody around here saying that they have the same CD player since 1986.
Right.
So making an investment in a good analog rig today is going to be still a great analog rig in 20 years from now. So I think it's absolutely paramount. One of the things that people like to talk about is, digital is great, and it is. I have a really good digital rig. It's at home. I've got an Esoteric Grandioso K1X with the external power supply and the clock, and I'm using an Arender N30 SA for streaming, but I still play CDs, SA CDs, and I do streaming as well. And I have found albums, like I was mentioning, the Carpenters' Greatest Hits, the one with the brown cover. Mm-hmm. I actually found a Japanese SA CD that was mastered by Bernie Grumman from the tapes, and it is the best sounding of that album I have, including the vinyl and everything else. So
vinyl isn't necessarily better.
It's not better, but I think
the
it's
time.
Exactly. Digital doesn't have to lose for vinyl to win, and vinyl doesn't have to lose for digital to win. You can have both and have a happy marriage. I'm glad I have both, and I listen to both. But I personally find that when I'm having a vinyl session at home, I listen a lot longer than if I'm listening to digital. I get kind of fidgety, I got the iPad and there's things going on and distractions and messages and things are, I get distracted with the iPad, even though I'm switching between songs and adding in the playlist and everything, still things are going on. When I have the vinyl, I put on the record, I put the iPad to the side, and I just thoroughly enjoy it. And I listen all the way through on both sides. Now, there's a technical reason why I think I personally prefer the vinyl. So I'm always searching out, original first pressings of things that came out before there was even digital. Or I'm seeking out all analog pressings like Analog Productions today, or the Tone Poets, or the In Groove,
Music
or
Matters.
Music Matters. There's a lot out there. Kevin Gray's new Marvin Gaye album, $29 on Amazon on sale. All analog recording. Sounds absolutely superb. Yeah. But there's something, I had the opportunity to tour studios a few years ago before COVID, and one of them was even RCA. And some of those studios were smaller, some were medium sized, and I was shocked by what I saw. I saw them with, older, inexpensive analog to digital converters. So I'm thinking to myself, on our side, on the digital side, we have people spending thousands of dollars on a DAC, right? Not everybody. Of course, people are buying $199, core DACs or whatever the case might be. But a lot of people are spending a significant amount of money on the DAC. Yeah. But the studios are using very inexpensive and quality questionable analog to digital converters. Now, there are some very good analog to digital converters out there. Merging technology makes one,
and the one we're talking through right now,
MSB made a really good analog to digital converter. Emerging Technologies makes an excellent one, but what I saw was not the top quality A to D. So I think if we look at a lot of these recordings, not only do we have questionable quality of analog to digital converters being used, but we also have the compression. So there's a lot, not to say you can't have compression on analog, but it's an overuse of compression, I think, on the digital side, because they want the recordings to sound good in the car and on your earbuds and things like that. So
you can't overcompress an LP. So even if it's pressed from a digital file, it can't be overcompressed. The needle will just pop right out.
Right.
So like the Adele record.
So yeah, so one of the things that Mike and I were talking about the other day was there's a website out there called Magic Vinyl Digital or magicdigitalvinyl.com. I forget the name. We'll put it in the notes, but this gentleman has a website, and he has the equipment. He measures. First of all, he takes an album like Adele 30, the latest album, and he has the CD and the streaming and the Blu-ray and the whatever, the vinyl. He has everything, every format he can find, and then he goes through and analyzes the album, and he's looking at the dynamic range and the level of compression and other things. And the Adele 30, I purchased it on CD, and it sounded like a typical Adele album. It was great music, great voice, very compressed, So when I read his review saying how good the vinyl was, I was skeptical, but optimistic. So I purchased it on Amazon, brought it home, played it, sounded like a completely different album when it was on vinyl. Yeah. So there are fundamental differences between the analog and the digital recordings. As I've said, some digital recordings sound better. There's absolutely, like I mentioned, the Carpenters SACD. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, if you're listening to older music before 1990, 1985, 1980, definitely before 1980, if you're listening to older music, it is going to be something you're going to want to have is a good quality turntable. And if you're going to be seeking out Led Zeppelin recordings or Cat Stevens or Miles Davis, or the list goes on, Oscar Peterson, Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, whatever, if you're going to be seeking out older recordings, it will benefit you to have a good quality turntable, and to get into following some of these other YouTube channels and reading about collecting and finding those good pressings out there. They're not all $200 or $100 for the. You can find some great albums for not a lot of money.
Yep.
And, most recently I picked up was it Impex, I think, did Saturday Night in San Francisco. We all know the famous Al Di Meola album, the Friday Night in San Francisco. I thought it was the same album because I kind of got the.
I thought it looks the same,
but there's actually a Saturday Night in San Francisco, direct from the tapes to the pressing, and it sounds phenomenal. So those are the types of things I'm looking at. I say, if you truly believe it's not about the equipment, it's about the music, I think having a turntable is, in your system is very, very important. So, I was not to beat a dead horse, but I was corresponding with somebody who's more on the pro side, and he was telling me that he's using a Scarlett 18i20. This is a box that does a variety of different things, including analog to digital.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking, well, this is pretty good thing. I'm reading about all the things it does and whatnot. $549.
Yeah.
It's not to say you can't get a good product for $549, but my issue is this thing does 8 different things. How good is that one part, the analog to digital conversion, in a $549 retail box?
Or a mic preamp or whatever. You're going to see a Scarlett 18i20 literally rack mounted in a studio.
Right.
So.
Right. So, that's where I see there's a real imbalance that we're spending thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars or whatever you want to say on a good DAC, but on the studio side. So I asked him, I said, why? And he said, well, if nobody complains, then there's no reason to get anything better. That's exactly what he said. Nobody complains, there's no reason to get anything better.
That's right.
So I guess for the masses, they're not really complaining. So another reason why the vinyl collecting is so important, because it is a smaller group of people that really care about the quality of the sound. Just watch some of the other YouTube channels out there, like 45 RPM, the gentleman from Germany, and I forget the name of the other channel. There's another one that from Western Canada that I watch, and these guys are, of course, Michael Framer and guys like that, but they're passionate about the recording quality. So I think it would be beneficial for somebody getting into the hobby to seriously make sure that they have a decent turntable, as part of the rig. And like I said, still going to be a decent turntable in 20 years from now. So
correct. Huge
Rick,
investment.
Any thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with you that if you're going to be starting out, if you can afford a nice entry-level turntable, the kind that we sell at Suncoast Audio, and then you can go to thrift stores and get records for 99 cents. You might get some newer records like the Adele record you were talking to.
Right.
But it's going to be a cost-effective way, especially if you're using a moving magnet cartridge, to get into analog sound.
Yes.
And then you can compare for yourself that against digital.
Right.
You can get CDs for 99 cents at a thrift store. So you can do that. But I think there is something to be said for the sound of analog, that it just can be smoother, it can be warmer, less fatiguing, and those things make it very attractive.
I mean, it's not inexpensive by any means, but if people are saying, okay, what would you get, Mike? What would you buy if I'm starting out? Something like a Riga P3. With the the cartridge that we now I'm trying to remember the name of the
Exact 2.
The Exact 2, with the Exact 2 cartridge, and then we love that little Sim Audio 110 LP phono stage. So if you don't have a phono stage in your integrated amp, your preamp, or your receiver, that little 400 was a 499, 599.
I think it's gone up to 599.
599
but it's still
bucks.
well worth it.
It does moving magnet, moving coils, got great gain, load set. You can set everything on it. It's completely adjustable. So for approximately under $2,000, you've got your turntable, your arm, your cartridge, your phono stage. You're set. Go buy records.
Yep.
Could you improve upon that? Absolutely. You could move up to a VPI. You could look at Navid. You could look at a Kuzma, a Kronos. I mean, sure, the sky's the limit when it comes to turntables, arms, and cartridges and phono stages. But to get started at a level beyond the Crosley, which is probably not something we would recommend.
Absolutely not.
Right. So we want something where you're going to be able to enjoy the music and not damage your records. And I think a Riga P1, even at $499,
sure,
is a good entry level way. But I would say if you can swing it, a P3 with the Exact 2. Either the matching Riga phono stage, which is I think around the same price as the Sim Audio.
Yeah, and still very good.
And very good. Or that 110 LP that we love from Sim Audio. absolutely fantastic. Now you're off to the races. Now you can go shopping and start building up, a nice little record collection. And I tell it, they all, new audiophiles will come to me. They want to get into vinyl and they get all flustered and they're like, how do I start? I say, you know what? Pick your 10 favorite albums.
There you go.
Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Let's go and let's find, good copies of these, either brand new reissues or whatever. I mean, I think Analog Productions, or I forget who did. There was an anniversary edition of Fleetwood Mac Rumors that came out. That's a fantastic issue. You can still find it today. So go out, you buy your 10 favorite albums and get started. That's it. So, Mike, any more thoughts on this discussion?
Well, I think it is definitely something that younger people are getting more into, as we've seen. I do agree with Michael Framer on that point. It's also very interesting to see, I was talking to you about this, the Little Big Beat YouTube channel, which essentially what they're doing is recording straight to tape. And you're getting to watch it live on YouTube, and then eventually, they'll press a very limited number of that record, and then you have, it's a limited thing, but it's something that they're recording bands and artists that young people are into.
Wow!
And so it's kind of starting to hopefully start a trend toward more analog.
I was watching 45 RPM, his latest video. He had, or one of his latest videos, he had Kevin Gray on there, a mastering engineer. And Kevin was talking about a new studio that he had put together. He's building his own studio. And this is a gentleman who's, in LA at the top of the game, the best of the best, and he can have anything he wants. But for his own studio, he built an all-tube system straight to analog. So Neumann microphone, Neumann tube microphones, tube all the way through the entire chain, all the way through, and then tape to vinyl.
Yep.
So if the mastering engineers are looking at this and they're doing it for themselves and having their own label per se, you got to wonder. I mean, he could have the best of, the best digital setup in the world.
Sure.
But he chose tube to vinyl, to tape to vinyl, because he says that's what sounds best. So that's from a mastering engineer. But again, I'm not ripping on digital. We sell a lot of digital products. I have a great digital setup at home, and I split my time between my Studers. I have two Studer 810 reel-to-reels, and I buy a lot of tapes from, Acoustic Sounds, Analog Productions, and I buy the Tape Project tapes and ones like that. But I have two turntables. I have a Kronos and an Avid, and then I have a very sophisticated, very good digital setup with the Esoteric Grandioso K1X, which I wanted because I have a lot of CDs and a lot of SACDs, and I still buy SACDs like crazy. So it's not that I'm, one way or the other. I think every audiophile should have both sources and enjoy both. Yeah. And, you, like I said, vinyl doesn't have to lose for digital to win, and digital doesn't have to lose for vinyl to win, or whatever, the other way around. Yeah. So, I think that's very, very important if you're getting started. So for people out there just saying, oh no, just get a good DAC and streaming's good enough. No, it's not. It's like, if you want to experience fine dining, I think definitely getting a turntable and enjoying some of the great all analog pressings that are out there, is a good way to go. So I've like I mentioned, I find I listen a lot longer. I have much longer listening sessions when I'm doing a vinyl session. With digital, as I mentioned, I get kind of fidgety and, start looking for other things to do. But with the vinyl, it's a good way to also, tune out from all the craziness that's going on in the world and just focus on the music. I was telling you on the weekend, I dug through my collection. I found my original UK first pressing mono of Rubber Soul and Revolver, and played them. And both albums start to finish and just thoroughly enjoyed it, you know.
Oh yeah, and that's something you can't enjoy digitally.
The all mono from the original tape, yeah, that's absolutely true. So somewhere, you know, you take those albums, you're taking the stereo remix and then you're converting it to digital and then back to analog. So it's like throwing it in the blender and, you know, stirring it all up. So yeah, you're exactly right. I also had a couple new albums come in from Analog Productions. One was a Sarah Vaughan, and trying to remember the other one. It was a 1955 Sarah Vaughan, and it was unbelievable mono recording. I mean, right, if you follow the chain, it was right from the tapes, you know, right through, and I couldn't believe it. I was playing it on my mono cartridge. You don't need a mono cartridge, but I have one because I have a lot of older mono jazz recordings, and I have the Beatles mono box set and things like that. But anyway, I was listening to it on my Miyajima Zero mono cartridge, and wow, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure
Nina Simone was the other one. It was a newer one, a 1965, 66 Nina Simone. That was stereo, and that was, again, an Analog Productions, and it was sounding a quality record pressing. Oh man, it was sounding fantastic.
Yeah,
you know?
There's nothing like a good, proper, full analog signal chain.
That being said, I do know people who say, you know, I'm never going to listen to the older stuff. I'm never going to listen to older jazz, older classic rock, or any of that stuff. I'm only looking for new artists. And if that's the case, you know, I would probably say you're fine. Just stick with the digital rig and put your energies into that. And if you're honestly just focusing on brand new artists and, you know, things that are, you know, no more than 5-10 years old, I think that's the way to go. Stick with a digital system. But if you do like to pull out a older jazz recording or classic rock, I think you're gonna have to have a turntable.
Agreed, 100%.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rick?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for vinyl records. I think they do have a certain warmth to them, a certain amount of focus where you put that record on and then you just sit there for 20 minutes and listen to the whole thing and kind of escape the world. You know, it is a very pleasing sound. There are some people that like digital just as well or better, and there's room for both of them. You know, we sell both products. We sell analog and digital products at Suncoast Audio, but there's certain things you can do in a analog chain that is very hard to do in a digital one. You can adjust your tracking force on your cartridge, your tone arm height. You can change different cartridges. You know, you can get different pressings of different the same record, which will sound different due to the age or the mastering of it. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up is when you are listening to an older record from back in the 60s, you know, you're listening to as close to the original as possible. And then you get some of these reissues and it's not going to be the same. You're going to lose some things because they're not going to be going right from the master tape. And they might be equalizing it for what they think a more modern audience wants to hear. You know, a lot of people now are listening through earbuds and headphones, and they're going to equalize that record for them.
Are you talking about the vinyl pressing they would do that? Or
Yes.
are you really?
Yeah.
Well, what I have found is that the older records were designed for the older turntables, so they didn't have as much bass, and you know
Right.
they were kind of rolled off
Yeah.
and whatnot. But the bass was always there; it's on the tape, and so the reissues, the remastering, I have found that they're better than the originals in a lot of cases because our modern turntables can handle the bass and they can handle different things. Plus, when you go to 45 RPM for an album, they're able to get even more bass information on the record, so the wider grooves, but they have to spread it out over, you know, a number of records, but you can get even better sound. So I think I don't. So you're thinking that some of the newer vinyl records, like Taylor Swift, for example, you think that vinyl record is more compressed than.
It's probably more compressed, but I think it's equalized different.
It's equalized.
I've heard people say they get the same album on a CD and on a record,
right?
And it sounds vastly different because, like you said, for the vinyl, they're going to have to limit the low frequencies.
Right.
On a CD or streaming, there's no limit. They can let it go down as low as they want it to. They don't have to worry about tracking problems.
Interesting. And my finding's been the opposite. That
Same.
I found it more compression and more limiting on the digital side than the vinyl side. So as I was mentioning that website magicvinyldigital.net or whatever it is. Anyway, just Google it and you can find it.
Mm-hmm.
The modern albums that this guy has done, like the Adele 30, the CD was so much more compressed than the vinyl record. And the dynamic range was, say, 8 out of 10 for the CD, but it was like 12 or 13 or 14, not out of 10, but it was dynamic range of, say 8 or 6 on the CD, but it was 12 or 14 on the vinyl. So you had a much greater dynamic range. So it sounded more natural, more uncompressed to my ears anyway. And that's kind of what his scope is. His instruments, his measurements showed. But your findings have been in that the CD, a good quality recording CD, is going to have more dynamic range than maybe the vinyl.
Well, technically it does.
It does,
okay. With the digital format, you've got more dynamic range, you've got lower frequency response, all that. So what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily transmit to what sounds good. Got it. But from the technical point of view, your channel separation, your signal and noise, all those things on digital beat vinyl.
Right.
But how does it make you feel? How much do you enjoy it? That's what really matters.
And then getting back to the whole discussion of the analog to digital conversion that goes on and the compression and the other things. So, digital definitely has great potential, and I think we're just starting to. I mean, analogs had 100 years. Vinyl's had 100 years of time to refinement. Yeah. And I think digital is really still in its early stages, and definitely. I mean, if you look at even 15, 20 years ago, where we were with digital compared to today, it's literally night and day. It's gotten so much better. The DACs are better, and the recording quality is better. The whole bit.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of the first digital records I got was Dire Straits album.
Brothers in Arms.
Yeah. And that was like, wow, that's on a CD. And listen to that, and we thought it was so great. But now you listen to it, and you can hear that they used what you said was the early analog to digital converters.
Exactly.
They didn't know the best way to go about it.
Didn't they record that to like digital tape or something?
I think they did. Yeah. I think they used almost like a videotape recorder to get the bandwidth on it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that was back in the day when all the CDs would have DDD and AAD, all that kind of stuff.
I don't even know what that is.
The process, it started out with analog, and then it was mixed analog, but it was mastered and pressed digital,
Right.
So each step of the process, they gave an alphabet number, image to. So you'd look on the box, and it'd be like, if you wanted AAA, that was a record.
Yeah, that sounds like what I would want.
A CD would be AAD, and then they were trying to sell you that it was better to go with DDD.
Like QRP. QRP was an early company that came out with DDD recordings,
Yeah.
So, but I don't know about you, but I mean, you've had a turntable since 1986 and maybe even before then. I've had one since the 1970s, and I do remember the period, early 2000s when, literally analog vinyl was on its life support, and it wasn't looking very good. And at that time I had an early Avid turntable, I believe. And I remember my wife making fun of me for continuing to buy records and collect records and play records. She was like, "No, nobody's doing that anymore." And I would say that it just sounds better. So I just kept buying records. And back then we had classic records, and they were some of the best recordings. I still have all the Led Zeppelin classic records and Led Zeppelin 4, and I don't know if that Led Zeppelin 4 tape has been touched.
It hasn't
since the classic records pressing.
It hasn't,
and I don't even know if it's usable. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I hear that in some cases the tapes only have, you know, limited lifespan, or they have one play left in them. I've heard you know, mastering engineers and whatnot talk about baking the tape, and they get one they get one more play out of it. And you know, I'm not sure if that was the case with the classic records, Led Zeppelin 4. You know, maybe they figured, well, we already have a CD of it, you know, we don't need. I mean, I don't know. I'm just assuming, but because they came out with an anniversary edition of Led Zeppelin 4, but they didn't use the tape. They used the digital files. And if you take that Led Zeppelin 4 vinyl record anniversary edition and you compare it to the classic records, which was the last time they used the tapes, it's night and day better. The classic records just stomps all over it. So again, all right, we're getting into the weeds here.
Yeah, we
are. Well, anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching our first episode. We're looking forward to having you guys participate. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and watch for our next podcast where we'll be bringing in our first guest. Thanks again for watching.
Thank you.